Hey, guys. Welcome to Building This Community.
This is your city business and policy development podcast. We're your hosts,
Luke Patrick
and Andrew Klump. Thanks for tuning in to our preview episode, where today our goal is to talk about the purpose of our new podcast series and what you can expect to see in this upcoming season. And what our idea here is kind of just threefold, just kind of talking more about, business, law, and just kind of how both play a role in a city and policy development space. So kind of using Louisville as a backdrop, since we're both, current Louisville residents. I'm born and raised here. Luke, you're from
homeowner in Louisville 4 years now.
Yeah. So, exactly.
I'm basically a Louisville native now.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is we want to use Louisville as like a Petri dish and look at it from the national and international scale of just saying, what are policies that we're doing that could be potentially used other places and help this kind of more mid-size city perspective? And then what are bigger cities and other cities across the globe doing? What are they doing that we could, actually make?
What could we mimic?
Yeah, what could we mimic, right?
As well
what
as
could we steal?
How have we gotten to where we are? What policies have been put in place at the local, state level that have resulted in the city we have today?
Well, and even to that, right, is like what policies, that we may not even want to talk about or bring up, like there are things like redlining or even like a lack of like urban planning or tree design that have really negatively impacted our city for such a long time. And now we're trying to deal with the ramifications of those policies or lack of policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Louisville has a pretty well-documented history of like having segregated housing policies, prior to a very big Supreme Court decision that actually arose out of this city. So, we just wanted to look at all of those things, the policy, the statutes, ordinance, the cultural aspects in Louisville that have really resulted in what we've got today, and try and look at what we can do to build a better city for the future.
Well, and I think part of that too then goes like, and so it's going to be like, can we take these overarching ideas and these concepts, but then also look at them in more granular detail, kind of like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then also kind of even looking at just how are then we on top of policies, how are they impacting particular segments of our city? So, like the startup scene, for example, what are policies that, we have the historical redlining. So is there a lack of Black entrepreneurs in our city? But then just the entrepreneurial scene as a whole, like what is Louisville's policies? What are they doing?
Yeah. Are we doing enough to facilitate that kind of thing? Yeah.
And so what's the private arm doing? What's the public arm doing? And what are steps that we can kind of take to kind of grow in both segments of our community?
Yeah. And when are we going to get a pro sports team?
Exactly. That one's kind of near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
So, some of the listeners might know that I've done some stuff with NBA to Louisville in the past, and hopefully, we can see that come to fruition. Or I'm finally glad that we're going to have an NWSL team, which is National Women's Soccer League, which is our first Tier 1 pro sports that we've ever had in the history of Louisville, or at least since the ABA Colonels. And man, there's so many, like I could go out on a side note forever, but there are so many missed opportunities that we could have had from a professional sports level. So, I mean, the ABA Colonels leaving in the 70s, or you talk about us missing the boat with both Memphis and having a non-binding agreement then with the Charlotte Hornets in 2001. Talk about almost having a pro NFL team, the team that is now in Buffalo, potentially was looking strongly at moving to Louisville in the 1950s. We almost had an MLB team in the 1960s. So, we had so many opportunities that we've just missed. And so that'll be something interesting to talk, not just about the missed opportunities, because that can be kind of depressing, but talking about like what impact, if we're looking at peer cities like a Nashville, not even a Nashville, a Memphis or Cincinnati or an Indianapolis, and looking to see what impact those cities have had from pro sports.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just pro sports. I mean, we've got all kinds of other things on the agenda. Urban planning plays a huge role in any city as it grows. and has Louisville done a great job?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
We will see.
And so, but you're looking at things where it's like, how does walkability impact storefronts? Like, what is the modern day storefront looking for now? I mean, do you need as much walkability in a public space? I mean, compared to, like a storefront like in Nulu versus having something out in the East End, having a mall. Like, what are we looking for when we're building and trying to have the city of the future?
I personally think the best way to design a city is to put a mall right next to another mall, just like we have St. Matt's and Oxmoor. That's the best idea we could have ever had, right?
I think listeners may not be able to tell. That is pure sarcasm coming out of this mouth.
That is a hefty dose of sarcasm. We're talking about two malls situated a quarter mile from each other, and one is starting to fall into disuse. And well, with COVID, I think the other one is probably falling on hard times as well.
Yeah, and Oxmoor, they can't even get a Topgolf put in there. So that goes to, but that goes, back into our city policy stuff, right? Is like, can we actually, like, Louisville promotes itself as a city that's really being pro-business and trying to go out there, and we're in a renaissance right now, right? And really into business development, but we're struggling to get a Topgolf here. Like Montgomery, Alabama has a Topgolf. Fishers, Indiana has a Topgolf. So like, these type of things where we try and promote ourselves is one thing, but do our policies and our people actually back that up? And so I think that's going to be, Topgolf is a great example of just what is something we can delve into and see, where do we actually stand as a city, both politically and as a community?
The outrageous fight that ensued to even bring a Topgolf into the city.
That has not ended.
That is ongoing. It's something interesting to talk about.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that we're going to hit from both a business perspective, and we'll even throw in some legal stuff too. So we might even get something to that can help start the startup community, like talk from like maybe a bankruptcy law perspective, or like a startup attorney, or something, or an employment law perspective, so that if you're trying to have your own business, maybe you can tune in here and not only see like, okay, what are you looking for, and maybe learn about like other resources that you could use as a small business owner here, right? So if there's an agency or an entity that you want to reach out to because that they can help you, that you can learn about through here. But you can also kind of look at this from a perspective of what can I learn from a legal angle, and say, okay, well, I didn't know this about bankruptcy law. I didn't know this about employment law. I didn't know I needed to do this, this, and this, and kind of just get yourself on the ground floor, and have yourself be a little more well-rounded as a business owner, or someone that's just trying to see change in this community as a policy.
And I wonder if we're ever going to get to talk about cooperatives, though.
Yeah. So that's another topic that's near and dear to my heart, is the cooperative business model, worker and or consumer owned. I love the Louisville Community Grocery and what the work they're trying to do.
I think Andrew's underselling himself a little bit. He's actually published in the area of cooperative law.
It was co-author. So
it's co-author.
Yeah. Basically how to draft bylaws for a cooperative grocery. And that was for the, like, and affecting food deserts, things like that. That was in the Georgetown Journal on Poverty, Law, and Policy.
So pretty reputable journal.
I was a co-author, to be very fair. But yeah, so that's kind of about us, or about our podcast. So I want to just let us talk a little bit now, I guess, about us. Right. So Luke's kind of hit it a little bit. So we both graduated from the University of Louisville, Brandeis School of Law here recently. And I am a corporate attorney now. So I deal in business law as much as possible, but I'm also on the Auburn Park City Council. So I've had some policy work, and I've really focused on a similar tree ordinance to kind of what Metro Louisville has done, and done some research there. I've worked with cooperative businesses, and I've really reached out and tried to talk to as many entrepreneurs and startups as I possibly can, just to kind of pick their brain and kind of learn what this community about, what Louisville is going through. So I'm hitting a bunch of different angles with this podcast, but it's kind of, this is Luke and I's brainchild, just because of our background and everything like that.
Yeah, we've been obsessed with how laws have affected our city, and you in particular, you've worked to try and help get businesses off the ground. You've tried to, get involved really intimately in the business community here in Louisville, and not as much me. I haven't been on the startup scene like you have, but I'm really interested to see Louisville grow as a city, but in a sustainable way. That like is going to create growth that for years to come we aren't going to look back and be like, well, why did we design the city like that? Why did
why do we have a highway go through the heart of our city?
Why do we have a highway going through the heart of our city? Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what has happened that we've, in so many ways forgot about the West End? Like how can we drive investment dollars to the areas that, I think really need it?
But before we get too deep into the weeds, Luke, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you?
Absolutely, man. As you know, I think we previously mentioned, we graduated the same year, 2019, from the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. I've done in-house counsel work at an insurance firm based here in the state. I've done some civil defense work, a little bit of workers' comp. Aside from that, I've worked in D.C. 2 separate times. From a really early age, I've just been obsessed with politics. And I think, same as you, we've just both been policy junkies for the longest time.
But see, that's why this is such a good policy podcast, right?
Yeah.
It's because we both are just policy junkies. And quite honestly, I don't think anybody else is really doing this. No one is looking how policies impact stuff. And that's just our natural quirk.
I don't think many people follow politics. At least local and state politics are far too often overlooked. The major media organizations focus far too much on national politics. Not that isn't interesting, not that isn't important, but local laws, state laws, those affect people's lives so much more than what's going on at the national scene. It's really profound, and I don't think most people know that.
And it can be more tailored. All those laws can be a lot more tailored.
It's much easier to impact change at the local level.
Oh yeah,
too.
absolutely.
So yeah, it's really a good thing for people to focus on, and I don't think people realize the impact that they can have. They just choose to get involved, and before you get involved, it really helps to know a little something. So that's kind of where we want to help out.
Absolutely, and so that's kind of the about us a little bit, and that's kind of like the genesis of what we're trying to do here. And so as a quick just kind of end to this preliminary preview podcast, we just want to talk about just the framework of this, and it's going to be more of maybe probably if we're having a tighter podcast, it'll probably be closer to like a 25-minute guest interview followed by like a 15-minute breakdown. So it's going to be whatever particular topic we're going to have. Say it's startups, we'll bring in a big startup entrepreneur from this city, or it's cooperatives, we'll bring up someone that's trying to start a cooperative in the city, and we'll talk to them for 25, maybe 45 minutes, whatever. And then we'll have our kind of gut reactions to us immediately after that's over. We're going to just talk one-on-one, see how we feel and kind of what we learned, and go from there. And then obviously we'll try and have maybe a error catch-up scene at the end. And I think you had, right, Luke, you wanted to do something where it was like an SSN or some sort of like article at the end.
I'd love to try and tie in some kind of white paper or some kind of newly published material to whatever subject we're discussing, to try and bring in, new ideas or at least ideas that are gaining traction, related to whatever we're discussing.
And so at the very least, we're going to probably try and link to our guests and try and give them, whatever credit they have for being on our podcast. But we also need to allow, our listeners to kind of gain a little more information, right? If they want to go into and find more information about a particular topic, this is our goal, right? Is to try and give them
we want to make
more
it as
access.
accessible as possible. Yeah. And honestly, I'm pretty excited about our guest list.
Yeah.
I really want to meet some of these people. I'm really excited to talk to them.
Yeah, and a lot of them are going to be very fascinating, and I think they have such unique perspectives that it's not just going to be Louisvillians. It could be people that were here previously that love this city and moved on and came back, and it could be people that were here for life. I mean, I'm essentially a lifer in Louisville, and I just want to see this city develop. But a lot of times you need people that have gone off and gone on to other places, bigger and better things, and to give that insight and that input back, because you can't grow if all we ever do is just look within ourselves for growth. We're never going to grow as much as we can. if we're looking other places. So I'm excited, like you said, for our guest list.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I would just say, the last tidbit of information that we have is that this is going to be a season-based podcast with weekly releases of each episode, contingent upon our guests and their schedules. Because we want high-quality people and high-quality interviews, our release dates may be subject to change. So please stay tuned and certainly subscribe to make sure that you are always up to date with when we are releasing new content.
As always, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us on Building This Community. If you'd like any more information, you can follow us on Twitter at BuildingThisCom, COM, or you can follow Andrew
at Andrew J. Klump. And you can also follow Luke
at LMP43. Definitely subscribe, and we look forward to talking to you guys next week.